Before meeting Janet, I led a relatively independent and satisfying life. My late 20s were a time of career progress and increasing stability. I had always imagined settling down with the right person, but I wasn't in a hurry. After several relationships, I started to understand that real companionship wasn't just about compatibility, but about building a purposeful life together. During one of those reflective periods, Janet came into my life. Meeting her changed my priorities almost immediately. She had a magnetic presence that made me feel like we could achieve anything together. Before long, we were planning for the future, marriage, and hopefully starting a family. We both envisioned a life based on stability, mutual understanding, and a commitment to support each other through all challenges. Janet and I got married later than most, with me being 28 and her 31. That was 6 years ago. Before we met, we had each fully enjoyed our youthful freedom, but that left us without much financial security when we finally started our life together. Before the wedding, we discussed our desire to have kids and our plan for Janet to stay home with them until the youngest reached school age. We both felt strongly that having a stay-at-home parent was important for a child's development, provided we could afford it. This gave us time to save money before expanding our family. Janet worked full-time while I took every overtime shift I could, often doubling up on Fridays and working long hours on Saturdays. Our hard work was paying off. We now owned our home outright and our savings were growing. Recent conversations suggested that kids were likely soon, hopefully before Janet turned 40, as the chances of having our first child would decrease after that. That's why the conversation we had this Thursday night felt so unreal. "Kurt, I want to talk about a trial separation," she said. My mind went blank. "What?" I blurted out in disbelief. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a breakup, you know the feeling. The other person seems to have it all figured out while you're left blindsided and unprepared. That was me at that moment. "Why?" I managed to ask, still trying to process what she was saying. "I just think we need some time apart to rediscover ourselves and appreciate each other again," she explained. "Let's be honest, Kurt. You're not as romantic as you used to be, and you seem to take me for granted. You always say you're too tired to go out. Our closeness has declined, and to be honest, you've gained some weight. Don't you think a break could help us?" I was speechless, struggling to absorb her words and the suddenness of it all. Had I been more composed, I might have noticed the subtle shift from us to me in her words. But at that moment it completely escaped me. "How about we take a month, Kurt?" she suggested. "Then we can reassess. I'll stay at Wendy's. You can call me whenever, but let's limit our in-person meetings to once a week. Any more than that and it won't feel like a real separation, will it? Just know, Kurt, that I love you deeply and believe we'll have beautiful children together. I'm confident that after a month, maybe 2 at most, we'll be back to where we were." With that, Janet stood, grabbed 2 suitcases from the hallway, and headed for the door. "Don't I get a say in this, Janet?" I stammered. "My decision is made, Kurt," she said firmly. "Please sit down, Janet," I pleaded. Reluctantly, she sat down again. "Who is he, Janet?" I couldn't help but ask. "Oh, Kurt, I knew you'd jump to that conclusion," she sighed. "I love you, Kurt, and only you. There's no one else, so there's no need to check my phone, follow me, put a GPS tracker in my car, or hire a private investigator. In fact, if you did any of those things, I'd see it as a lack of trust, and we'd have to reconsider our relationship." As she moved to stand up again, I instinctively grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "This isn't fair, Janet. You've had days, maybe weeks, to plan this out and make your speech. But it's all new to me," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "What move, Kurt?" she asked, finally reflecting some of the confusion I was feeling. "Don't you see that what you've done risks our relationship? Janet, this one-sided decision feels disrespectful. I've always treated you as my equal, and I'd never make such a risky move without discussing it with you first." "What risk, Kurt? I love you, and you love me. Where's the damage in a short break? If I miss you before the month is up, I'll come back in an instant." "And what do you mean by contempt?" she asked, her tone now curious and concerned. "I mean you haven't given me a chance to explain myself," I replied. "For example, we don't go out much because I've been working overtime on Fridays and Saturdays. We agreed to those extra hours to improve our finances. Our closeness has faded, partly because of the natural evolution of a 6-year marriage, and partly because I'm always exhausted. As for my weight, it's because you suggested I take on the supervisor role for extra pay, which isn't as physically demanding. Those are just my initial thoughts in the last 2 minutes. Can't you stay so we can talk this through properly? I'm sorry, Kurt. I promised Wendy I'd go out with her tonight, she said softly but firmly. With that she stood, picked up her bags and walked toward the door. All I could say was, just remember Janet, you're still married. She paused briefly but then continued out the door without looking back. That night I couldn't fall asleep, leaving me exhausted and unprepared for the grueling 16-hour shift the next day. Despite my fatigue, I couldn't change plans. The afternoon shift supervisor had already made arrangements, counting on my promise to cover for him again. In my line of work, letting your guard down was never an option. So there I was on Friday night in the wrong place at the wrong time, nearly being run over by a 35-ton loader. I barely managed to jump out of the way at the last second, feeling the heat of the exhaust as I touched the ground. Adrenaline kept me going through the rest of the shift, heightened by hunger. Since Thursday, Janet's usual grocery run had been skipped because she was busy packing. The next day I was back at work by 10 a.m., surviving on sandwiches made from stale bread. The following night, I stopped by a 24-hour corner store to pick up supplies. When I got home after 11:30 p.m., I saw the message light blinking on the phone. It was Janet, telling me she missed me and thanking me for giving her space by not calling. She mentioned she'd be out late again that night and asked me not to call, which left me feeling more resentful. Here I was, working myself to the bone to contribute 3 times as much to our savings, while she seemed to be enjoying herself without a care. It was a bitter feeling, one I hadn't experienced before. Neither of us reached out on Sunday. By Monday, I decided to tell my boss I wouldn't be available for overtime for the time being. When he asked why, I told him about the near accident on Friday night, and he looked surprised and quickly agreed with my decision. By Wednesday, with no contact from Janet, she finally called. It didn't seem like she had much to say. Feeling a bit guilty for ignoring her, I decided to make things right. On Thursday evening after dinner, I headed to Wendy's house with a bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates as a peace offering. Wendy, Janet's best friend who had been divorced for over a year, welcomed me in. I never knew the real reason for her divorce, but I had my suspicions. She said Janet was in the shower and invited me to wait on the couch. As I sat, Wendy moved closer to me, making me uncomfortable. I shifted away subtly, but she persisted. Thankfully, Janet appeared just then. I gave her the flowers and chocolates, but our conversation was awkward and lacked the ease we usually shared. After some small talk, Janet asked, "Was there something you wanted, Kurt?" Her question caught me off guard. "No, I just came by to ask my wife out on a date tomorrow night," I said. "I'm sorry, Wendy and I already have plans," Janet replied. "Wait, tomorrow is Friday, you usually work on Friday nights," I pointed out. "Not anymore, I quit," I admitted. "But what about the money?" she asked, clearly concerned. "I've decided to prioritize my marriage and my health," I said, looking her in the eye. With the extra responsibilities of cooking, cleaning and working full-time, I've been more exhausted than ever. When you left me that message last Saturday night about going out, I realized I was pushing myself too hard. Last Friday I was so tired that I almost had a serious accident at work. Janet's expression shifted to shock and she hugged me. "Please be careful," she whispered. "I'll need you in a few months." The moment was interrupted when Wendy returned to the room, ending the conversation abruptly. "Sorry to rush you, Kurt, but we have a Tupperware party starting soon," Wendy announced. Taking the hint, I left quickly. Some things a man just shouldn't stick around for. Janet walked me to the door and in desperation I asked, "Please come home, Janet. I miss you." "Give it 3 more weeks, Kurt. We'll talk then," she said, visibly uncomfortable. Any hope I felt vanished when she added, "Take a break from overtime for a month and rest up. We'll need the extra money, Kurt." I glanced at the flowers and chocolates she tossed aside and left without another word. Over the next week, Janet called twice, disappointed that I hadn't reached out. I tried to explain that between working full-time, cooking and going to the gym, I had little time left, but she didn't seem to get it. The next week I stopped by on Tuesday night. Again, Janet was in the shower when I arrived. This time I avoided the couch, recalling the discomfort from my last visit. Wendy, dressed to the nines, stood too close for comfort, making me uneasy. When Janet finally came downstairs, also dressed up, she seemed a bit uncomfortable as she explained, "I should have called first. Had I done so, I would have known they were going out." Feeling embarrassed, I was quickly ushered out, and as the door closed behind me, I thought I heard giggles. I vowed that would be the last time I let myself feel humiliated. Neither of us reached out for the rest of the week. The following Sunday, I was in the backyard lifting weights I had made myself. I could feel my strength returning. Suddenly, I felt arms wrap around me from behind, and someone press against my back. It was the first human contact I'd had in over 2 weeks, and I welcomed it, until I heard Wendy's voice whisper in my ear. "Sorry, handsome." "I couldn't resist," she murmured. Shocked, I quickly pulled away and turned around, trying to hide my discomfort. I offered her coffee and couldn't help but notice her outfit, which, though typical for her, showcased an ample amount of cleavage. I made sure to sit at the far end of the kitchen table to create some distance, but Wendy dragged her chair right beside mine so close our legs were touching. We engaged in awkward small talk, a skill I had never mastered. "Are you going to ask how Janet's doing?" Wendy inquired. "No," I responded firmly. "She made it clear that's none of my business." Wendy's smile widened. "She's a little upset, you know. She thought you'd be begging and groveling by now." "Sorry, Wendy. That's not my style," I replied. "I asked her out on a date when I first came here and she turned me down, saying she already had plans. She never bothered to reschedule. I don't know what this separation is about, so I'm just going to wait and see if she comes back, or if our marriage is done." I knew everything I said would get back to Janet. Wendy's reaction was predictable. Instead of showing concern, she smiled and placed her hand on my leg. I felt like this was a test, one I was determined to pass since I had no emotional attraction to Wendy. Physically, though, she was tempting, especially since another button on her blouse had somehow come undone. "You know, I've always admired you and Janet as a couple," Wendy continued, her tone probing. "You must be really secure in your love to let her date other guys, or are you just pretending not to care?" My blood ran cold. We hadn't discussed dating during this separation, but my reminder, "Don't forget you're married," should have made my stance clear. Without a word, I abruptly left the house and headed to the backyard. Through the kitchen window, I saw Janet lounging on the deck in a bikini sunbathing. With determination, I marched outside. "What's this about you dating, Janet?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. "I haven't been dating Kurt," she answered nonchalantly. "We met a couple of guys last Tuesday at a club, danced with them, and mentioned we might be there again. We bumped into them last night, but it wasn't a date." "And what happened last night?" I pressed. "Nothing inappropriate, just dancing," she said. "They bought us drinks, but we didn't kiss or do anything like that, we just danced." "Since when is it appropriate for a married woman to dance with other men while her husband's not there?" I asked. She was silent. "If you see them again, it'll definitely be a date, and it's definitely inappropriate." "Janet, all of this is hurting me. I still don't know what this separation is about. Can we skip the next 2 weeks and just have you come home? I really miss you." "No, Kurt, not yet," she replied firmly. "In fact, I think we'll go longer than a month. I haven't gotten my old feelings for you back yet." She seemed oddly uncomfortable, like she didn't truly want to say that. Of all her recent behavior, this was the most confusing. I stared at her for a moment before getting up to leave. "You could ask me on another date, you know," she remarked casually. "You might get lucky this time." Without pausing or turning back, I replied. "Or you could ask me out, you know where I live." Starting Monday, Janet called the home phone every night. Our conversations were brief and uncomfortable, and I had the feeling she was just checking to see if I was home. The implication didn't sit well with me. On Friday night, the call forwarding to my mobile worked perfectly. I answered, hearing music in the background. I was already on my way to Wendy's house and saw Janet's car was missing from the driveway. I drove by the nightclub strip nearby and eventually spotted her car parked outside one of the bars. I peered through the window and saw Janet and Wendy sitting alone in a booth. Shortly after, 2 more women joined them. One was Barbara, a friend of Janet's, and the other was unfamiliar. Seeing my chance, I slipped into the bar unnoticed and took a seat in the corner, far from their view. A few minutes later, luck was on my side as the booth next to theirs emptied. I quickly sat down, staying out of sight by keeping my back to them. With some effort, I managed to catch most of the conversation with Barbara leading it. Conversation? You're crazy, Janet, Barbara said incredulously. From what you've said, your Kurt sounds way more romantic than my husband, said a voice I didn't recognize, likely belonging to the stranger. Yeah, I agree, the stranger continued. I would have been happy to get half of what you described from my ex. Wendy chimed in. Don't you think Janet deserves better? Just look at her. She's gorgeous. Barbara added. I don't know. This sounds like a dangerous game to me. How do you treat him, Janet? Do you spoil him rotten? He must be exhausted from all that overtime. Do you keep him in bed all Sunday, giving him everything he wants? If you were mine, I would, Janet replied softly. But I couldn't make out her words. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, and the next thing I heard was Barbara's voice again. Is that all? And you're still making this guy fight for you? At that moment, someone started the jukebox, giving me the perfect opportunity to slip away to the restroom. When I came back, my booth was taken, so I returned to my corner in the bar. As the crowd grew, I wondered how long it would be until the guys showed up. Over the next hour, I watched several men approach the girls attempting to make conversation, but all of them left disappointed. Then I noticed the unfamiliar woman walking toward the bar. As she passed my corner, I made a show of moving aside for her. She smiled and ordered 4 drinks. While waiting, she turned to me and asked, So, do you come here often? With a playful grin. Hey, that's my line. I joked. Well, you were too slow. She shot back. We struck up a light conversation until her drinks were ready. I noticed her glancing at my wedding ring finger. The conversation at my table is awful. Do you mind if I use you as an excuse to escape? She asked, flashing a mischievous smile. Do I mind if a beautiful woman talks to me? What do you think? But I should warn you, I'm married, though my marriage is in serious trouble. I admitted. Wow, well, thanks for being honest. I'm just looking for some company, so if that's okay, I'd still like to chat. She responded, her smile softening. Alice returned a couple of minutes later, and we continued talking easily for the next hour and a half. I kept glancing over to ensure no one noticed us. I saw a man had taken the empty seat at the girls' table, buying all the drinks. Alice was great company, and we quickly felt comfortable with each other. Around 11:30, Barbara approached us. You're right, he is cute. Barbara whispered to Alice with a smile. Alice, do you want a ride? Janet's offered to drive us home, Barbara asked. I've got to get going anyway. It was lovely talking to you, Alice, I said, kissing her on the cheek. She blushed as she handed me a business card with a smile before leaving. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Janet calling through the forwarded home phone line. Are you having a party at the house? She asked suspiciously. No, I'm at a bar. I've been chatting with a beautiful girl all evening, I replied, not backing down. What the hell, Kurt? Who said you could do that? She exclaimed. Are you implying that you're the only one who can date? Or are you saying I can't? I shot back. You can't while you're married to me. I expect you to behave appropriately, she said sharply. So, you're saying you didn't call me from a bar earlier? I challenged. Well, yes, she admitted reluctantly. And I suppose those guys from last time didn't show up either, right? I pressed. No, yes, maybe, she stammered. Look, Kurt, I told you I'm not dating, she replied, her tone uncertain. Janet, can we just stop this nonsense and go back to how things were? Come home now, I'll meet you there, I pleaded, softening my voice. There was a pause before she replied. No, Kurt, I'm just not ready. Okay, then just come for the night, I tried again. No, sorry, Kurt, I'll call you later, she said before hanging up. The hours dragged on, and just as I was falling asleep, I heard the garage door open. My heart raced, thinking Janet had come home. I looked out the window and saw her car parked across the street. As the garage door closed, I realized she had only come by to check if I was home before driving off again. Disheartened, I returned to bed, my mind swirling with confusion. The next Saturday afternoon, Wendy dropped by. I confronted her about Janet's behavior, but she denied knowing anything, though unconvincingly. "What are you doing, Wendy?" "I'm married to your best friend," I said, holding her at arm's length as she tried to get close to me. "For now, Kurt," Wendy replied with feigned innocence. "I just wanted to see if I'd have a chance with you after Janet leaves." Her words sounded ridiculous, but they confirmed my suspicions. "Don't you mean if Janet leaves me?" I corrected. "Of course, Kurt, I really hope things work out for you," she said vaguely, sensing my unease. I walked her to the door, though she seemed reluctant to leave, even offering to prepare a picnic for us. In the end, I had to firmly explain how inappropriate her behavior was before she finally got the hint. "Are you and Janet going out tonight?" she asked before leaving. "Yes, probably," I replied, feeling frustrated. Later I decided to call Alice. She was happy to hear from me but said she couldn't meet that night. "How about Tuesday instead?" she suggested. "Just as friends, Alice. I'm still going through a messy situation, but I really enjoyed your company the other night," I reminded her, not wanting to lead her on. "I understand, Kurt, I enjoyed our chat too." "Let's meet Tuesday," she said warmly. Monday marked the beginning of a new routine with Janet. She started calling me at 6 a.m. every day, again at 6 p.m. when I got home from work, and once more before bed. Though she claimed it was because she missed me, she kept refusing to come home. It was becoming clear she was just checking up on me. On Wednesday, I noticed a message on the home phone answering machine. Though it was just from a marketing company, its significance struck me. It hadn't been diverted to my mobile. When I checked the home phone, I discovered the call forwarding had been disabled. It seemed someone had been by the house. When Tuesday arrived, I met Alice at her apartment and we headed out to a restaurant. She looked stunning as usual. Once we were seated, I decided to ask her a more personal question. "So, would you like to tell me why your personal life is a bit complicated?" I asked, curious. Alice smiled but hesitated before answering. "Sure, her name is Diana," she revealed. Diana turned out to be Alice's 3-year-old daughter. The father had left them after deciding that family life wasn't for him. Tonight, Alice's mother was watching Diana. To steer the conversation away from my own problems, I turned the focus back to her experience at the bar last week. "You mentioned the conversation at your table was pretty awful. What was that all about?" I asked. Alice sighed. "Oh, it was just terrible conversation and shallow people. There was this woman named Janet. She's currently separated from her husband, but she's hoping that the separation will make him fight for her, be more romantic and all that. The crazy thing is, from what she described, he already seems like a great guy," Alice explained. I frowned. "Great how?" "He brings her flowers every week, takes her on date nights every month, spoils her. Even though he works late on Saturdays, he still gets up early on Sundays to make her breakfast. He even surprised her with a cruise last year. Honestly, I would have been thrilled with half of that for my ex," Alice said, shaking her head. "Some people just don't appreciate what they have." "It gets even crazier," she continued. "Before they even separated, she was trying to make him jealous." "How?" I asked, intrigued. "She would come home later and later from girls' nights out wearing men's cologne on purpose. One time she even got a pair of underwear from her friend Wendy, used ones if you can believe it. She left them on the bedroom floor hoping he'd notice, but he didn't say a word," Alice recounted, both amused and baffled. "Her husband sounds pretty clueless," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "Or maybe he loved her so much that he ignored those signs," Alice suggested. But when all her tricks failed, she and her friend came up with this trial separation idea, hoping it would make him desperate. Instead, he's not reacting at all. "Good for him," I said. "Yeah, but when he didn't play along, they tried escalating. She stopped reaching out to him, and when he ignored her, her friend planted the idea that she was dating other guys. Still, he didn't bite. Honestly, I admire him." "It's exactly what I'd do if someone treated me like that," Alice said sympathetically. "The heartbreaking part is when Barbara asked Janet how much effort she put into the marriage. That's when Janet seemed to realize how one-sided their relationship had been. You'd think that would be the wake-up call she needed to stop all this, but no. They've backed themselves into a corner because this proud guy refuses to follow their script," Alice added. She could just go back to him, lay everything out and try to fix it, I suggested. Yeah, that's probably what she really wants. But I think her friend is the one keeping her on this path. Wendy gave her some strange, almost carnivore looks last Friday, Alice said, her tone thoughtful. Do you think her friend is trying to drive a wedge between them to go after the husband herself? I asked. You might be onto something. It would fit with what I've seen, but if that's true, it makes her a cold, manipulative person, Alice said, narrowing her eyes. As our meals arrived, the conversation turned to lighter topics, but I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at me. When the waitress cleared our plates, I felt I had to address it. You know, Alice, everything you've said has convinced me that you're a genuinely good person with strong values, I began. Thank you, she replied with a smile. Do you think I'm a decent person? I asked, bracing myself. Yes, I do. I think I'm a good judge of character, and I have no doubt you're a kind person, Alice answered without hesitation. Taking a deep breath, I realized what I had to do. I need to tell you something, I said, gently holding her hands. Please forgive me, Alice, but I haven't been entirely truthful with you. I've been struggling with a lot of confusion lately, and I've done things I'm not proud of in an effort to sort it out, but I respect you, and that's why I need to be honest and tell you everything. Alice looked at me with concern, waiting for me to continue. My name is Kurt, and I've been married to a woman named Janet for 6 years. About 4 weeks ago, she insisted on a trial separation despite my objections. Tonight, a new friend suggested I should move on from her given the disrespect and pain she's caused me, and I've been leaning that way myself. You were right, I did treat her like a queen. But looking back, I see how little she gave in return. Alice's expression shifted as a range of emotions flickered across her face before settling on horror. She covered her mouth with a clenched fist. Oh my God, did I just call your wife a stupid witch? She gasped. Actually, I was quite offended that you spoke about my wife that way, I replied, trying to keep a straight face. Her expression softened a bit, though the conflict in her eyes lingered. Do you realize your first concern was whether you offended me? That speaks volumes about your character. Of course, I forgive you, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Alice looked relieved but still tense. So is that why you approached me on Friday night? Were you trying to gather information? I hesitated for a moment before nodding. You're right, that question caught me off guard. But, can I count on your friendship until this situation gets resolved one way or another? Absolutely, Kurt, but I want to be clear. I don't want to have any part in sabotaging your marriage, she said firmly. Thank you. Your friendship is all I need right now. From my perspective, I thought our marriage was perfectly fine until one Thursday when Janet dropped the trial separation bombshell. She originally planned to leave without explaining anything, but I insisted on some clarity. Even with her explanation, I'm still confused. I didn't have many close friendships because I was so focused on either work or my relationship with Janet. Alice listened carefully before asking, do you think there's a chance for reconciliation? I'm not sure, Alice. Part of me feels like taking her back after the way she's treated me would be a letdown to myself. And after our conversation, I've realized just how one-sided our marriage has been, especially when it comes to romance. Honestly, it's a bit embarrassing to admit, I confessed. By mutual agreement, we shifted to lighter topics for the rest of the home to relieve her mother, who was babysitting Diana. I had a great time tonight, Alice said with a smile as we stood outside her apartment. So did I replied, kissing her on the cheek before saying goodbye. The next day, as I walked toward the grocery store, I heard someone call out from a nearby coffee shop. I turned around to see Janet, Wendy, and another woman sitting at a table. My heart sank when I recognized Barbara. She couldn't hide her surprise upon seeing me. You! Barbara exclaimed, her eyes widening. The implications hit me quickly. Janet would soon realize I had been spying on her, and that there were no men involved in her Friday night outings. Depending on what Barbara said, Janet might even figure out that Alice had shared details with me. Surprisingly, I wasn't as concerned as I expected to be. I made a polite excuse to leave, saying I needed to get home to cook. I watched Janet's face for any signs of guilt, but she didn't seem to notice anything. Later that night, around 9:30 p.m., the phone rang just as I was about to fall asleep. Janet's voice came through sharply on the other end. Kurt, didn't I tell you not to spy on me? This shows a lack of trust and respect, she scolded. From my perspective, Janet, you started this separation without giving me a clear explanation. Wouldn't you try to understand the situation too? I responded, frustration seeping into my tone. It's still a violation of our agreement, Kurt. Your agreement, Janet, I shot back, letting the silence hang in the air, hoping she'd understand the difference. But her response took an unexpected turn. Kurt, I'm struggling to figure all of this out. This trial separation isn't playing out the way I thought it would. I'm not sure if my feelings for you are what they need to be. I think we should extend it by another month or two to see how things go. She paused, waiting for a reaction. I chose to stay silent. If she was hoping for an outburst, she wasn't going to get one. Okay, Kurt. I didn't want to bring this up, but I think it's fair. I believe I should be allowed to date other men. Maybe it will help me appreciate you more and reignite my feelings for you, she continued, her voice soft but determined. This time, my silence wasn't deliberate. I was simply stunned. When I finally found my voice, I decided not to speak. Anything I said wouldn't resolve the situation. Kurt, are you still there? She pressed. I think dating would be a serious mistake, Janet, I replied, my voice steady. Let me be clear. If you date or engage in anything that crosses the boundaries of our marriage, meeting a man repeatedly, dancing, touching, or kissing another man, I will take it as your decision to leave our marriage. Am I clear? There was silence on the other end before she responded, her voice sharp. Well, Kurt, I don't think you're in a position to set terms. You don't own me. I think I'm entitled to the romance and companionship I've been missing over the past month. At that moment, I seriously questioned Janet's state of mind. Did she not realize the reason she was missing romance was because she had left the person who provided it? So Janet, you're still intent on opening up this marriage, are you? I asked, struggling to comprehend her logic.